Thanks very much for that introduction. The EIB is the EU's project bank, if you like, to contrast us with the central bank or possibly even the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We focus on investment in sound projects. And we were actually set up originally, our purpose was to invest in the infrastructure to join up the EU. So that's really our core business, if you like. I would be perhaps claiming too much if I said I was responsible for all the operations of the European Investment Bank. I'm only responsible for our operations outside the EU. Just to give you an idea, outside the EU we invested 7.4 billion euros last year, of which about 1 billion was in Africa, Sub-Saharan and North Africa. And 63% of that portfolio was infrastructure. So that really remains our core business. We do a bit of everything, and our slogan is that we lend, we blend, and we advise. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. And in terms of the lending, most of it's senior debt, but we also do equity guarantees and so on. Advice is absolutely central to everything that we do. We bring the expertise from what we've learned within the EU to bear outside. And whether that's financial structuring expertise, or we actually have about 300 sector experts in areas like energy, water, transport, etc. But to come back to this regional question, we know exactly how difficult it is even to invest in developed countries effectively in regional infrastructure and the kind of policy barriers that there are. I always find it a great irony that we have such a poor rail transport between Luxembourg, where we're headquartered, and Brussels, which is where most of the EU institutions are. And we've been there since 1958, and we haven't been able to solve that, basically because of issues between the relevant governments that I won't go into. So we know it's difficult there. How much more difficult is it in Africa? It's really challenging. So recognizing that, I'm very much working the European Union together with the African Union and the regional economic communities and the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, indeed. Back in 2007, it was agreed to set up something called the EU Africa Infrastructure Trust Fund. So that's the kind of takeaway that I'd like you to have from at least my first intervention today. Because the issue is, yes, definitely there's a need for at least $93 billion of investment. But I think, as you've already heard, how challenging it is for investors to find the bankable projects that they can invest in. And so this is one really very key tool, because deliberately the choice was made just to focus this on regional infrastructure, precisely because it's so hard that it effectively needs some form of subsidy to get those bankable projects together. So a lot of the there's actually a total of 947 million euros in this fund, and so far 77 projects have used grants from the fund. A lot of this is project preparation, technical expertise. It takes, sometimes even decades actually to get these big regional projects off the ground, and we need to allow for that. Sometimes it's direct grants for specific elements of a project that might otherwise not get funded. So maybe it's the safety elements if it's road transport. It might be interest rate subsidies, it might be insurance premiums. But there's no question, without this kind of money, then we're never going to be able to leverage in serious investment. And we estimate that the leverage figure at the moment is probably about 12.5 or so. We'll see how that changes over time. But this is an instrument where, for the most part, it's the European institutions that are involved, although sometimes the World Bank is involved in the same projects. But I think the key is that without this kind of subsidy, you'll never get strategic investment in infrastructure. I think if we just left it entirely to the private sector, then basically we'd just see transport from mines to the coast, and you wouldn't see what you need and what we've needed in Europe, which is the strategic hubs, the strategic corridors, that enable growth, that enable trade, that enable companies to succeed. So I'll just close by mentioning an example of the kinds of infrastructure that I mean. And I think colleagues on on the table. I'm not sure yet we've got the Hinduja group involved, but I hope we do over time. But others are definitely involved in the West African power pool. I think it might have been mentioned actually by Bruno, which develops electricity exchange between the ECOWAS countries. So we were one of those who assisted in the preparations for the investment evaluations for the priority interconnections. So Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali. On the one hand, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. And I mean, a lot of those countries, not the easiest environments in which to work. So our loan was just 75 million, but I think it was possibly the long-term technical support which really made the most difference in the long run. So these high-voltage transmission backbones are going to be absolutely crucial for stable and cleaner supply of electricity, also picked up by colleagues here. As the EU's bank, we have very, very strict policy in terms of the projects that we can support. In fact, we've just adopted a new policy which sets basically an emission performance standard. Now, in the least developed countries, there might be a case of not always for going for the greenest solution, but very often and increasingly, it is actually the best solution, and our economists definitely spend a lot of time working out what is the most sustainable institution. So I'll finish there, because there are a few projects I could mention, but I'm hoping we're going to get more chances to answer your questions about those, and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.